In this unit, we'll explore Thomas Hobbes on government. Here's an outline of the various issues that we'll discuss. We begin by talking about the war of all against all. Hobbes begins his political philosophy by talking about the state of nature. The state of nature is a state in which there is no government. Hobbes thinks that in such a state, that is, in a state without any government, there would be three important elements: competition, distrust, and the struggle for glory. He thinks that these together would lead to a war of all against all. And since these would be present in the state of nature, that is, if there is no government, he thinks, there will be competition, distrust, and the struggle for glory. And competition, distrust, and the struggle for glory collectively lead to the war of all against all. It follows that in the state of nature, there would be a war of all against all. That is, if there is no government, everyone will be at each other's throats. So let's start with the first element, the element of competition. In the state of nature, there isn't a rule-enforcing body. That's just definitional of the state of nature. So there's no police and there's no sovereign, that is, no king. Well, Hobbes also thinks that in the state of nature, everything can be useful. And because everything can be useful, people's desires will surpass available resources. And it's important to see here that when he says desires will surpass available resources, he's not saying resources are so scarce that it's inevitable that desires will surpass resources. He's rather saying that even if resources are abundant, desires will still surpass resources. Why? Because everything that there is could be useful to me. And the same holds for you. So why is it that he thinks everything could be useful to me or to you? Well, let's take a simple object here. We have a stick depicted at the bottom of the screen. And along comes Maroon, and Maroon looks at the stick and thinks, hey, I could use that to make a fire. And then along comes Orange, and Orange thinks, I could use that to club a raccoon. Well, this single resource could be useful to each of them. So there's bound to be conflict. There's bound to be competition. Now, Maroon thinks further, if I don't acquire the log, Orange can use it to club me. And Orange thinks, even if Maroon only uses the log to start a fire, that will help Maroon to survive, which will put Maroon in competition with me in the future. So, thinks Orange, I better get this stick just so that Maroon doesn't get it. So that's the sense in which everything is useful. And you can imagine if you think of everything as useful in this sense, it follows that desires will surpass resources. Next, Hobbes says that because everyone is roughly equal and everyone believes herself to be the wisest, each of us expects to win in any battle. Now, it's obvious that it's just not true that everyone is exactly equal. Some people are stronger than others, some people are cleverer in certain ways than others, and so on. So what does Hobbes mean when he says everyone is roughly equal? What he means is this: in terms of our ability to kill each other, everybody is roughly equal. So each person will think, I could take that other person in a fight. Now, notice that this holds even if it's clear that one of us has some physical advantages. So in this case, Maroon is much bigger than Orange. So why should Maroon fear Orange, and why should Orange think that she can beat up Maroon? Well, she can think to herself, I can hide in a tree and drop a rock on Maroon's head. Notice that it doesn't take a genius to hide in a tree and drop a rock on somebody's head. And because of that, each of us is roughly equal in the following way. Each of us has the ability to kill any other given person. So when Hobbes says everyone's roughly equal, what he means is just this. In terms of our ability to kill each other, we're all roughly equal. And there's a quote on the screen now which you can read through in which Hobbes is basically saying this. I'll read the bottom of the quote. He says, "For as to the strength of body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest." And then he explains how you might do that. What about this? Why should we say each believes herself the wisest? Well, Hobbes's idea here is pretty straightforward. It's not that each of us thinks that we're better at math than the person sitting next to us, or that each of us thinks that we're better at writing than the person sitting next to us. It's rather that I believe that whatever I believe is true, and you believe that whatever you believe is true. Notice that this is trivial. It's trivial that I believe what I believe is true. At least that's what Hobbes thinks. Why? Because if I didn't believe that something was true, it wouldn't be among my beliefs. And if I do believe it's true, it is among my beliefs. So it's trivial, thinks Hobbes, that I believe that whatever I believe is true. And the same holds for you. Now, notice what this means. Whenever you and I differ in our beliefs, I think I'm right and you're wrong, and you think you're right and I'm wrong. That's the sense in which each of us believes that he or she is the wisest. Each of us believes that his or her beliefs are the correct beliefs. And here's a quote from Hobbes along these lines. He says, "For such is the nature of men, that howsoever they may acknowledge many others to be more witty, or more eloquent, or more learned, yet they will hardly believe there be so many so wise as themselves." And then he gives a reason why you might think this. He says, because they see their own wit firsthand, and other men's wit at a distance. Now, what he means by this is pretty straightforward as well. I notice all of my successes. I managed to figure out how to use this software so that I can be talking to you and posting this video online. You managed how to, get online and consume the video. Well, you see your successes. I see my successes. So I tend to think of myself as a pretty effective person. You tend to think of yourself as a pretty effective person, and so on and so forth. Okay. Next, Hobbes claims that if there is no rule-enforcing body, and desires surpass resources, and each of us expects to win in battle, then each person is a threat to each other person. Now, we've already established in number 1 that there is no rule-enforcing body. We've already established in number 2 that desires surpass resources. And we've already established in number 3 that each of us expects to win in battle. Well, given that if these conditions hold, then each person is a threat to each other person, it follows that each person is a threat to each other person. So this is Hobbes' account of competition. He says, in the state of nature there will be competition, and because of competition, each person is a threat to each other person. And there's a quote on the slide. You can hit pause and read through it if you're interested. Okay, so that's the first element of the state of nature, competition. And the consequence of competition, thinks Hobbes, is that each person is a threat to each other person. The second element of the state of nature is just going to make things even worse, and it's distrust. So Hobbes says that because each person knows that she's a threat to others, that others are a threat to her, and that everyone knows that, each person will expect others to attack her. So here's the idea. You have Maroon and Orange, and Maroon thinks I could take that guy in a fight, and Orange thinks I could hide in a tree and drop a rock on her, that is, on Maroon. Well, Maroon then thinks Orange knows that I could take him in a fight, and Orange thinks Maroon knows that I can hide in a tree and drop a rock on her. Well, since Maroon thinks Orange knows I could take him in a fight, Maroon then thinks, he could drop a rock on me, he could kill me too, and Orange thinks the same kind of thing in parallel. That is, Orange thinks Maroon over there could beat me up. Well, Maroon then goes on and says, look, I know that he knows that I can beat him up, and I also know that he knows that I know that he could drop a rock on me. And Maroon thinks the same kind of thought. I know that she knows that I can drop a rock on her, and that she knows that I know that she can beat me up. Maroon then thinks, I also know that Orange is motivated to attack me, because I know that he wants my stuff. And Orange thinks the same thought. Well, Maroon then thinks, I therefore expect Orange to attack me at any minute. And Orange thinks the same thing about Maroon. Okay, Well, then Hobbes says, look, if each person expects others to attack her, then each person is motivated to strike first in order to prevent from herself being attacked first. Well, we've just established that each person expects others to attack her, so we get the consequence that each person has good motivation to strike first. So we get the conclusion that each person is motivated to strike first. So now we have two elements of the state of nature in place. Because there's competition, each person is a threat to each person. And because there's distrust, each person is motivated to strike first. Now comes this perhaps most worrisome element of the state of nature, and it's called the struggle for glory. So here's Hobbes' idea. He says people who attack most viciously will gain a reputation for being ferocious. So what's the idea here? Remember our log from the beginning with maroon and orange in competition over the log. Well, suppose maroon picks up the log and decides to attack orange because maroon doesn't trust orange. Maroon expects orange to attack her. So then maroon picks up the log, and now maroon is going to think, now that I have this log and I've attacked orange, what should I do? So maroon imagines, well, here's option one. I can just say, well, I have the log, I'm happy, I'll be content with my log, and I'll take off and leave orange to do what orange will do. But then thinks maroon, what will orange do? Orange is going to think, I'll get maroon next time. Well, here's another option, thinks maroon. Instead of sort of walking away and leaving orange to live orange's life, I could beat orange really severely, just gruesomely, destructively, but leave orange alive. Well, what will happen if I do that and walk away, thinks maroon. Well, I know what will happen. Orange will say, I'll avoid that maroon next time, she's crazy. So, thinks maroon, for my own self-interest, I really ought to go with option two. So maroon beats orange rather severely. So this is the point that people who attack most viciously gain a reputation for ferocity. Well, crucially, says Hobbes, if you have that kind of reputation, then potential rivals will sometimes back down. So the idea is, maroon gains this reputation for being ferocious, and then someone else comes up and sees, oh, it's maroon. I was going to try and steal that log, but I'm not going to because maroon is scary crazy. Consequently, when others back down, one gains more resources at a lower cost to oneself. So here's the example. You have maroon and orange, and orange sees maroon and is like, oh, I remember you. You're crazy. The block is all yours. I'm going to back off. So now maroon gets the block without putting herself at any risk, without even having to fight. Consequently, people who attack most viciously will gain more resources at less cost. And that's exactly what you want to do. That's everybody's goal. Why? Because remember, every resource can help your survival. So the result is that everyone has motivation not only to strike first because of distrust, not only to strike because of competition, but also to strike as viciously as possible because of the struggle for glory. And here's a quote on the slide. You can hit pause and read through it if you're interested. Okay. So now we have these three elements. Competition makes everyone a threat to everyone. Distrust makes everyone motivated to strike everyone first. And the struggle for glory makes everyone motivated to strike as viciously as possible. After this, Hobbes talks about a fourth, what we might call element of the state of nature, although he doesn't call it that. He says there are three elements to the state of nature, those that we've gone through. But he adds in this fourth what seems like an element of the state of nature, and he calls it domination. So here's the idea. Imagine you have orange hiding behind a rock here, and maroon comes along, and orange thinks, I have the drop on maroon. I have the advantage here because maroon doesn't know I'm here, but I just don't want to fight right now, so I'm going to let maroon pass. Well, then along comes someone else, this multicolored person who has a rock, and what does orange think? Orange thinks, man, I should have tried to get that stick, because if I had that stick, I'd be better positioned to defend myself right now. The point here is, according to Hobbes, that you should never let a chance to increase your power pass you by. If you ever have a chance to increase your power, even if you're content with what you have, you should still try and expand your power. Because if you fail to expand your power, you're putting yourself at risk, and you should never put yourself at risk. So here the idea is, even if it seems like you have enough, you're still always motivated to strike. Okay, so what is the war of all against all? Well, the war of all against all is a state in which everyone's at everyone's throat. Each person is constantly looking for a way to attack each other person. It is a giant bloodbath. And Hobbes thinks in the state of nature, which remember is any state that doesn't have a government, that is any condition in which there is no government, there's bound to be this giant bloodbath. And here comes a famous quote from Hobbes. He says, consequently, life in the state of nature, that is life in a situation without government, would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.